The lonely millionaire. The lonely millionaire spent every Christmas alone, watching everyone leave at the end of the shift. But that night, his new employee, driven by an impulse she herself didn't understand, stopped and said, "Dinner at my house." And without knowing it, she changed his destiny forever. Another Christmas, another Christmas. Only those words echoed in José Marquez's mind as he gazed at the fireworks exploding over Madrid. His reflection in the window returned the image of a successful man at the top of the world, custom-made suit, platinum watch, empty crystal glass in hand. But his eyes told a different story, a story of loneliness that not even the 3 billion euros in his bank account could fill. He stepped away from the window and scanned the attic of his mansion with his gaze, decorated with a Christmas tree that a professional decorator had installed purely for formality. The gifts under the tree, all for him, bought by his assistant, seemed to mock his solitude. What sense did it make to unwrap packages when you already knew exactly what they contained? A memory pushed its way through the shadows of his mind. The last family Christmas exactly 30 years ago. His father, before abandoning them for his secretary, handing him his first watch. "So, you learn that time is the only thing that's really valuable, Jose. Neither money nor people are reliable." Lesson learned, Dad. Lesson painfully learned. Jose poured himself another whiskey, his third Macallan of 25 years that night. The liquor burned down his throat but was unable to warm the cold he felt inside. His phone vibrated on the marble table. The illuminated screen showed the name of Veronica, his ex-fiancée, who conveniently remembered his existence every Christmas after leaving him for his best friend 3 years ago. He rejected the call with a brusque gesture. He already knew exactly how that conversation would go. First, the syrupy greetings, then the feigned nostalgia. Finally, the real motive. "I'm going through a tough time, Jose. If you could help me." Always the same, always the money. The crushing silence of the attic was only interrupted by the ticking of his grandfather's clock, the only family heirloom he cherished. It marked 9:15 p.m. The streets would be full of people gathering with their loved ones, exchanging sincere hugs, sharing homemade food prepared with love. Things he only knew from the Christmas movies he secretly watched every year, torturing himself with images of a happiness that seemed as alien as it was unattainable. 9:30. Everyone will have left by now, he murmured to himself. He had insisted, as every year, that all the staff leave early to celebrate with their families. No one should be working on Christmas Eve, he told them with a generosity that hid his true motive. He didn't want witnesses to his pathetic solitude. He preferred honest silence to poorly disguised pitying glances. The sound of soft footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Jose tensed, irritated at the idea that someone had disobeyed his orders to leave. He looked up, prepared to unleash his frustration on the intruder. Then he saw her standing in the doorway. The new domestic employee hired just a month ago. Cristiana Fernandez, young, probably not over 30, with a face that didn't fit conventional beauty standards but possessed something indefinable that captured attention. Her eyes, large and expressive, looked directly at him without the usual mix of servility and calculated flirtation he had seen in other employees. "I'm sorry, Mr. Marquez," she said with an accent that betrayed her humble origins. "I didn't know you were still here." Jose frowned, annoyed by the interruption but also intrigued by the unexpected presence. "I thought I had given clear instructions for everyone to leave early," he replied with more dryness than he intended. Cristiana didn't flinch at his sharp tone. She was still wearing the gray service uniform, but she had let down her brown hair that she normally kept tied up during work. The result was a curious image. Half employee, half free woman. "I know, sir. I just came back for my bag," she explained, pointing toward the hallway. "I left it in the supply closet." Something in her expression caught Jose's attention. There was no typical rush to leave that other employees showed when interacting with him outside work hours. Instead, she looked at him with something like curiosity, concern. "Don't you celebrate Christmas?" asked Jose, surprising himself with the interest he showed in the personal life of an employee. A shadow crossed Cristiana's face. "Not this year," she replied simply. "I moved to Madrid recently for this job." My family is in Valencia. Jose nodded, recognizing in those curt words an entire story of sacrifice. He had forgotten what it meant to give up something out of necessity, not choice. When you have billions, sacrifices are always optional. An awkward silence ensued. Christiana took a step toward the door, clearly preparing to leave. I should go, she said with a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Merry Christmas, Mr. Marquez. Jose nodded mechanically, expecting to feel relief at the prospect of returning to his self-imposed solitude. Instead, the idea of spending the next hours alone with his dark thoughts suddenly seemed unbearable. Christiana was already in the hallway when Jose's voice stopped her. Do you have plans for dinner? The words came out of his mouth before he could analyze them, surprising both him and her. Christiana turned with a cautious expression. Not really, she replied, studying him with those eyes that seemed to see beyond his facade of a powerful man. I just bought something simple to prepare at home. Jose nodded, trying to feign a calm he didn't feel. His rational mind screamed that he was making a mistake. Relationships with employees always ended badly. She would probably misinterpret his intentions, or worse, interpret them correctly, and see how pathetic he was. A man with all the money in the world, and not a single person to share Christmas Eve with. But something stronger than his reason pushed him to continue. You could stay for dinner, he offered, trying to make it sound casual. There's plenty of food. The chef left everything prepared before leaving. He saw the surprise on Christiana's face, followed by something he couldn't identify. Doubt, compassion, genuine interest. That's very kind, Mr. Marquez, she replied after a moment. But I don't want to impose on you on such a special night. Jose almost let out a bitter laugh. Special. This night was just like every Christmas Eve of the last 15 years. Expensive whiskey, food he barely touched, and the echo of his own thoughts as his only company. It wouldn't be an imposition, he insisted, surprised by his own vehemence. In fact, it would be nice to have company. The last words he uttered almost in a whisper, as if admitting his need for human company was an unforgivable weakness. Christiana observed him for a long time, as if trying to decipher a particularly complex enigma. Jose braced for rejection, for the polite but firm excuse. Why would a young woman want to spend Christmas Eve with her boss? A man 15 years older known for his difficult character. But then, Christiana did something Jose didn't expect. She smiled. A genuine smile that transformed her face, illuminating it with a warmth that contrasted with the aesthetic coldness of the attic. I have a better idea, she said with a confidence that seemed to arise from nowhere. Why don't you have dinner at my house? The proposal hung in the air, so unexpected that Jose took a few seconds to process it. He, Jose Marquez, having dinner at an employee's house. It was absurd, unthinkable, completely unconventional. At your house, he repeated, unable to hide his perplexity. Christiana nodded, and for a moment seemed as surprised as he was by her own suggestion. It's nothing luxurious, she clarified quickly. Just a small apartment I rented when I moved for this job. But the food will be homemade, authentic. Jose found himself speechless, something that hadn't happened to him in years. Part of him wanted to reject the offer immediately, maintain distances, preserve hierarchies, protect himself from the unknown. But another part, one he believed buried under years of distrust, felt strangely drawn to the simplicity of the proposal. I don't want to impose, he said finally, giving them both an elegant out. It's not an imposition if I'm the one inviting you, Christiana replied with disarming simplicity. No one should be alone on Christmas. Those words, spoken without drama or pity, resonated deeply in Jose. It wasn't a movie line or an approach strategy. It was simply the truth said by someone who seemed to understand it from her own experience. My car is downstairs, Jose heard himself say, barely recognizing his own voice. We could. I have my bicycle, she interrupted softly. But it's fine. We can go in your car if you really want to come. Jose looked at her intently, searching her face for signs of ulterior motives, opportunistic calculation, the social hypocrisy he was so accustomed to. He found none of that, Just a sincere invitation from someone who, for reasons he couldn't quite grasp, didn't want to leave him alone on Christmas Eve. "Give me 5 minutes to change," he said finally, making a decision that contradicted all his self-preservation instincts. As he headed to his room to change his suit for something more casual, Jose felt something strange in his chest. A forgotten warmth, a sensation he took a while to recognize because it had been so long since he'd experienced it. It was hope. Jose's Aston Martin DB11 purred softly as they glided through Madrid's streets, moving away from the exclusive neighborhoods and into areas he rarely frequented. The Cristiana, seated beside him, directed the way with a naturalness that contrasted with the tension he felt. "Turn right at the next street, Mr. Marquez." "Jose," he corrected, feeling strange saying his own name. "If I'm having dinner at your house, I think we can drop the formalities." Cristiana glanced at him sideways with a mix of surprise and something else he couldn't interpret. "Jose," she repeated, as if testing how it sounded. "And you can call me Cristiana, of course." Silence settled between them again, but it wasn't entirely uncomfortable. Through the window, Jose watched as Madrid transformed. The luxurious buildings gave way to more modest constructions, but full of life. Families walking together, neighbors greeting each other at doors, children running with their new toys despite the hour. A world completely foreign to his. "It's here," Cristiana indicated when they reached a narrow street in the Lavapiés neighborhood. "You can park on that corner." Jose looked around with some unease. His €200,000 Aston Martin clashed grotesquely in that setting. Several passers-by had already stopped to admire the vehicle. "Is it safe to leave it here?" he asked, immediately regretting his comment. To his surprise, Cristiana smiled. "Safer than in many rich areas," she replied without a trace of offense. "Here, the neighbors look out for each other. No one will touch your car, I promise." Jose nodded, ashamed of his prejudice, parked, and followed Cristiana to an old but well-maintained building. There was no elevator, so they climbed 3 floors up a narrow staircase. The contrast with his daily life couldn't be more stark. He, who had a private elevator straight to his attic, was now slightly out of breath upon reaching the landing. "It's nothing special," Cristiana warned as she searched for her keys in her bag. "But it's cozy." When she opened the door, Jose found himself facing a small but impeccably clean apartment decorated with simple taste. It couldn't be more than 50 square meters in total, but every corner seemed maximally utilized. A small living room connected to an American kitchen, and 2 doors that probably led to the bathroom and bedroom could be seen. What caught his attention most, however, was the atmosphere. Unlike his mansion, perfectly decorated but soulless, this place brimmed with personality. Photographs on the walls, books stacked on improvised shelves, a handmade blanket on the sofa, signs of a life lived, not simply bought. "Come in," Cristiana invited. "Can you leave your coat there?" Jose entered with some caution, feeling strangely out of place. He, who was accustomed to people feeling intimidated in his presence, was now the one feeling insecure. "Wine," Cristiana offered, heading to the kitchen. "It's not a special vintage, I'm afraid." "The wine is fine," Jose replied, watching her move with ease in the confined space. While Cristiana prepared dinner, Jose approached the photographs decorating the wall. In several of them appeared an older woman who shared Cristiana's expressive eyes. "Your mother?" he asked, pointing to one of the images. Cristiana nodded while skillfully chopping vegetables. "Yes, she lives in Valencia with my younger sister. I usually spend the holidays with them, but this year—" Her voice trailed off slightly. The job was too good to turn down, even if it meant being away at Christmas. Jose felt a pang of guilt. He was part of that system that separated families, that forced people like Cristiana to choose between their loved ones and economic survival. "You must miss them," he commented, trying to show empathy, a skill he rarely practiced. "Every day," she replied with disarming honesty. "But my mother understands. She always says that sometimes you have to move away to be able to come closer later." Jose reflected on those words. He had moved away from everyone, building higher and higher walls around himself, but never with the intention of coming closer afterward. His distancing had been definitive, a self-protection decision that had become a prison. "And you?" Christiana asked, interrupting his thoughts. "Does your family not celebrate together?" The question, asked naturally, touched a sensitive nerve. Jose tensed visibly. "My mother is on her annual cruise with her latest husband," he replied with more bitterness than he intended. "I haven't heard from my father in decades." Christiana nodded without pressing further, but Jose felt the need to continue, to fill that silence with truths he rarely shared. "The last Christmas we spent together, I was 13, he said, looking out the window at the city lights. "My father abandoned us that same day. He left with his secretary and never contacted us again, except through his lawyers during the divorce." "I'm sorry," Christiana said. And strangely, Jose believed her. It wasn't the empty condolence he usually received, but genuine empathy. "It was a long time ago," he replied, trying to downplay it. "It doesn't matter anymore." Christiana looked at him in a way that made him feel exposed, as if she could see through his facade. "Old wounds are sometimes the ones that hurt the most," she commented simply before returning to the kitchen. "Dinner will be ready in a few minutes. It's nothing elaborate, just Spanish tortilla and some cured meats I brought from Valencia the last time I visited my mother." Jose approached the small kitchen, intrigued by the aroma beginning to fill the apartment. It wasn't the type of smell he was accustomed to finding in the Michelin-starred restaurants he frequented, but something more basic, more honest, something that evoked memories of a distant childhood before money and power became his only language. "Can I help with anything?" he offered, surprising himself. Christiana seemed equally surprised but smiled. "Can you set the table?" she suggested, pointing to a small cabinet. "The plates are there." Jose found himself performing a domestic task for the first time in decades. He set the plates, cutlery, paper napkins with Christmas motifs that Christiana indicated. It was a trivial activity, but strangely satisfying. When they finally sat down to dinner, Jose was surprised by the simplicity of the arrangement. A small table, ordinary plates, cutlery that didn't match, and yet everything seemed more authentic than the elegant dinners he was used to. "Let's toast," Christiana proposed, raising her wine glass. "To what?" asked Jose, genuinely curious. Christiana seemed to think for a moment. "To unexpected encounters," she said finally with a warm smile. Jose nodded and gently clinked his glass with hers. "To unexpected encounters," he repeated, feeling the weight of those words. The tortilla turned out to be delicious, with that exact point between custardy and juicy that few achieve. Jose surprised himself eating with appetite, something he hadn't experienced in a long time. The conversation flowed with a naturalness that disconcerted him. They talked about trivial things at first, the weather, the city, Christmas traditions. But little by little, without knowing exactly how, Jose found himself sharing stories from his childhood, memories he had kept buried for years. "So you threw all the paint on the neighbor's dog?" Christiana laughed after hearing an anecdote from his youth. "It was an accident." Jose defended himself, surprised to discover he was also laughing. "But the poor animal ended up completely blue. My mother had to pay the dog groomer's bill for a year." It was strange to remember those times when his family was still together, when laughter was common in his home, before money and success became his only measure of value. "And you?" he asked, genuinely interested. "What were your childhood Christmases like?" Christiana's eyes lit up at the memory. "Chaotic," she replied fondly. "We're a big family, uncles, cousins, grandparents, all together at my grandmother's house in Valencia. There was always someone arguing about politics, some kid crying because they didn't get the gift they wanted, an aunt drunk singing off-key carols." "Sounds intense," Jose commented, trying to imagine that scenario so foreign to his experience. "It was, and wonderful at the same time." Christiana looked at him directly. "You know what's the most curious thing? We were never rich. Sometimes we even struggled, but I never felt like I was missing anything important." Those words resonated in Jose more deeply than he would have liked to admit. He, who had everything materially, felt a constant void that nothing seemed to fill. "Sometimes I think," Christiana continued, her gaze lost in her wine glass, that true wealth is in having someone to share both the good and the bad with. It doesn't do much good to have all the material things if you're alone to enjoy them. Jose felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. It was exactly what he'd been feeling for years, but he never dared to articulate, not even to himself. "Why did you invite me?" he asked abruptly. "The truth, please." Christiana seemed surprised by the question, but didn't evade his gaze. "Because I saw sadness in your eyes," she replied simply, "the same that I see in the mirror since I arrived in Madrid. And I thought that maybe, just maybe, two shared solitudes could be a little less lonely." The honesty of her response left Jose speechless. There was no calculation, no hidden intention, just a human gesture from someone who recognized in him a pain similar to her own. Outside, the fireworks continued illuminating the Madrid sky. Jose realized that for the first time in many years, he was experiencing something akin to the Christmas spirit that songs and movies talked about so much. It didn't come from expensive gifts or luxurious decorations, but from something much simpler, a genuine human connection. As he watched Christiana serve a simple dessert, homemade nougat that, as she explained, her mother had brought on her last visit, Jose felt something loosen in his chest. An armor he'd worn so long it had become part of him began to crack. And for the first time in decades, he didn't try to repair those cracks. Midnight had come and gone without either of them noticing. The conversation between Jose and Christiana flowed with a naturalness that surprised both, as if they were old friends rediscovering each other after years of separation, not a millionaire and his domestic employee who barely knew each other. "It's officially Christmas now," Christiana noted, looking at the small wall clock that marked 1:15 a.m. "Merry Christmas, Jose." "Merry Christmas," he replied with a warmth in his voice he hadn't used in decades. They had moved to the small sofa, where they shared the second bottle of wine. Jose observed the apartment with new eyes. What he had initially catalogued as modest now seemed genuinely cozy. Every object had a story, a purpose, a connection to Christiana's life. Nothing was there simply for ostentation or because a decorator decided it matched the color scheme. "I have to confess something," Christiana said, fiddling with the rim of her glass. "When I saw you today in the attic, so alone, you reminded me of myself when I arrived in Madrid. That first Sunday, sitting on this very sofa, wondering if I'd made a mistake by moving away from everything I knew." "You don't seem like the type of person who regrets her decisions," Jose commented. "I don't regret it," she clarified, "but sometimes loneliness can make you doubt even the most correct decisions." Jose nodded, understanding perfectly what she meant. How many times in the solitude of his mansion had he questioned the path he'd chosen, the fortune he'd amassed, the buildings he'd constructed, the empire he'd created? For what? To end up drinking alone every Christmas Eve. "You know what's the most ironic thing?" he reflected aloud. "I always thought money would give me freedom, and in a way it did. I can go wherever I want, buy whatever I desire. But it also built an invisible cage around me. Every euro earned was another bar." Christiana listened attentively, without judging, without that look of envy or resentment he usually encountered when talking about money with people of lesser means. "Cages have doors," she replied finally, "even invisible ones. Some doors are hard to find when you've been locked up so long you've forgotten to look." A comfortable silence settled between them. Outside, the last fireworks occasionally illuminated the small living room through the window. Jose realized that for the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to fill every silence with words, to prove his worth, to impress. He was simply present. "You should stay," Christiana said suddenly. Jose looked at her surprised. "It's late," she continued with a shyness that contrasted with the determination of her words. "And you've been drinking? You shouldn't drive like that." "Can I call my driver?" he replied automatically, though the idea of returning to his empty mansion suddenly seemed desolate. Christiana nodded, accepting his response without insisting. Jose admired that about her. She didn't pressure, didn't manipulate. She simply offered and accepted with the same grace. Though she added after a moment, it would be a shame to interrupt this conversation. Jose surprised himself smiling. Not the calculated smile he offered in business meetings, but a genuine, spontaneous one. "You're right," he conceded. "It would be a shame."
He decided to stay.
Christiana improvised a bed on the sofa with blankets that smelled of fabric softener and a pillow that, though simple, turned out surprisingly comfortable. Jose, accustomed to Egyptian cotton sheets of 1,000 threads and custom mattresses, found in that humble bed a comfort he hadn't experienced in a long time. When they finally said goodnight to sleep, Jose remained awake a while longer, contemplating the unfamiliar ceiling. On the walls, the shadows cast by the street's Christmas lights created hypnotic patterns. He felt strangely at peace, as if he had found an oasis in the midst of the emotional desert that had been his life. Morning arrived with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the sound of Christiana moving discreetly in the kitchen. Jose sat up, momentarily disoriented. His Patek Philippe marked 9:30, an unusually late hour for him, who usually woke at dawn, even on holidays. "Good morning," Christiana greeted when she saw him awake. "I hope I didn't wake you. I try to be quiet." "The coffee woke me," he replied, running a hand through his tousle hair. "It smells wonderful." Christiana smiled, pouring 2 cups. They weren't the elegant porcelain pieces Jose was accustomed to, but simple ceramic mugs with somewhat faded Christmas motifs from use. "Officially Merry Christmas and in daylight," she said, handing him a cup. "I don't have much for breakfast, I'm afraid. Just toast and jam." "It's perfect," Jose replied sincerely. They breakfasted by the small window, watching the street come to life. Families going out for walks showing newly opened gifts, neighbors greeting each other effusively, the festive bustle of a neighborhood where everyone seemed to know each other. "I have to go soon," Christiana commented while clearing the plates. "I promised to do a video call with my family at 11. "Of course," Jose nodded, aware that his presence was probably interrupting her plans. "I'll take you wherever you need to go." "It's not necessary. I'll just go to the corner call shop. They have better connection than my Wi-Fi." Jose frowned, unable to imagine not having stable access even on a holiday. "Why don't you use my phone?" he offered, pulling out his latest model's smartphone. "I can set up a call with better quality than any call shop." Christiana hesitated but finally nodded. "That would be wonderful. My mother always complains that she sees me blurry on video calls." An hour later, Christiana was chatting animatedly with her family in Valencia via Jose's phone, which he had set up with the best possible connection. He had stepped aside discreetly to give her privacy, but he couldn't help glancing at her. The transformation on her face while talking to her mother and sister was notable, an inner light that made her seem even more beautiful. Jose found himself reflecting on his own family relationships. When was the last time he talked to his mother for more than 5 minutes? When did he genuinely interest himself in her life beyond obligatory formalities? He couldn't remember. While waiting, his own phone vibrated with a message. It was Eduardo, his personal assistant, reminding him of the Christmas party at the business club at 8 p.m. A gathering of Madrid's elite where the most influential members exchanged contacts under the pretext of Christmas charity. Jose looked at Christiana, who was laughing at something her mother said, and then back at the invitation on his phone. The two realities seemed irreconcilable. For the first time, the prospect of spending hours in calculated conversations, surrounded by people who measured every word and gesture based on their potential benefit, seemed profoundly unpleasant. He replied to Eduardo with a brief message. "I won't attend this year. I have other plans." When Christiana ended her call, her eyes were slightly reddened, but with a satisfied smile. "Thank you," she said, handing back the phone. It was wonderful to see them so clearly. "You're welcome," he replied, putting away the device. "They seem very close." "We are," she confirmed proudly. "My father died when I was 12. Since then, it's been just the 3 of us against the world." Jose nodded, admiring that family strength he had never experienced. "I have to ask you something," Christiana said suddenly with a more serious tone. "Why did you accept coming last night? You could have said no. You had 1,000 reasons to." The question caught Jose by surprise. It wasn't the type of direct questioning he was accustomed to. In his world, people rarely dared to question his motives. "I'm not sure," he replied after a moment of reflection. "Maybe I was lonelier than I wanted to admit. Or maybe," he paused, searching for the right words. "Maybe I saw something authentic in you, something I've been seeking without realizing it." Christiana looked at him for a long time, as if evaluating the sincerity of his response. "Most of my friends would think I'm crazy for inviting my boss to dinner," she commented with a slight smile. "A millionaire boss at that." "And what would you tell them?" "That sometimes people aren't what their bank account suggests," she replied simply. "For better or worse." Jose felt a connection with this woman that he couldn't explain rationally. It wasn't physical attraction, although Christiana was undoubtedly beautiful in her natural, unpretentious way. It was something deeper, more essential, as if he had found someone who could see through the layers of wealth, power, and himself to the man he once was, or perhaps the man he could become. "I have to go," he said finally, though every fiber of his being wanted to stay longer in that small apartment. "But before I do, I'd like to invite you to dinner tomorrow, if you're free." Christiana seemed surprised. "Dinner," she repeated as if she hadn't heard correctly. "Yes, dinner," Jose confirmed, surprising himself with his nervousness. "Not as your boss and my employee, but as Jose and Christiana." A silence stretched between them, charged with meaning. Jose could see the internal struggle on Christiana's face, the weighing of risks, the consideration of social barriers that seemed insurmountable just 24 hours before. "You don't have to answer now," he added hurriedly. "Can you think about it?" "Yes," she interrupted with a decision that seemed to surprise even her. "I'd like to have dinner with you tomorrow." Jose felt a wave of joy so intense it disconcerted him. When was the last time something as simple as an acceptance to dinner had made him feel this way? He couldn't even remember. As they said goodbye at the apartment door, Jose realized that something fundamental had changed in him. Christmas, which for so long had represented solitude and bitterness, now seemed to offer an unexpected promise of something new. Christmas afternoon passed for Jose in a state of strange anticipation. Upon returning to his attic, he found himself observing the empty spaces with new eyes, the immense rooms, the Italian designer furniture, the artworks valued in millions. Everything suddenly seemed hollow, like theater sets without audience or actors. The silence he once considered a luxury now felt oppressive. He surprised himself thinking about Christiana's small apartment, how every corner contained fragments of a real life, photographs that told stories, books with worn pages from so much reading, small objects that were worth nothing but meant everything. In contrast, his mansion seemed a cold museum, perfectly curated but devoid of life.
His phone rang.
"Eduardo, again." "Jose, are you sure you won't attend tonight?" his assistant asked with barely perceptible concern. "The mayor will be there, and also Hernandez from Mediterranean Construction. You know we've been trying to get a meeting with him for months." "I'm sure, Eduardo," Jose replied with a firmness that brooked no argument. "We'll have other opportunities with Hernandez." "As you wish," Eduardo sighed. "Do you need anything else?" Jose hesitated a moment. "Actually, yes. I want to reserve for tomorrow at Terraza del Cielo. Table for 2 at 8. Terraza del Cielo? Eduardo's astonishment was evident. "That's not your usual type of restaurant." Jose smiled to himself. Terraza del Cielo wasn't the most exclusive or expensive establishment in Madrid, but it had something that the high-end kitchens he usually frequented lacked: authenticity. It was a place with history, with soul, known for its incredible views of Madrid and its reinvented traditional Spanish cuisine. "I'm trying something different," he replied simply. After hanging up, Jose spent the next hours in a state of restlessness he hadn't experienced in a long time. He found himself reviewing his closet, questioning every custom suit and Italian shoe. Everything suddenly seemed too formal, too calculated. What would Christiana think of his usual Armani and Tom Ford? Would she see the man behind the suit, or just the millionaire everyone knew? The next morning, after a surprisingly restful night's sleep, Jose found himself making an unusual decision, calling his mother. He hadn't spoken to her in months, beyond obligatory birthday greetings and the occasional message. Jose. Elisa Marquez's voice sounded genuinely surprised. Has something happened? Nothing, Mom, he replied, feeling a pang of guilt for his mother's astonishment at a simple call from her son. I just wanted to know how you are, how you spent Christmas. The conversation was brief, somewhat awkward, but for the first time in years, Jose made a real effort to listen. His mother was in Bali, with her new husband. She seemed happy, different from the bitter woman he remembered from his adolescence after his father's abandonment. We should see each other when I get back, Elisa said before hanging up. It's been too long, son. I'd like that, Jose replied, surprising himself with the sincerity in his words. Upon hanging up, he realized something Christiana had mentioned the night before. Loneliness can make you doubt even the most correct decisions. Perhaps some of his decisions hadn't been so correct after all. Moving away from everyone, building higher and higher walls around himself. Who was he really protecting? What was he running from? The hours passed with exasperating slowness. Jose tried to work, reviewing emails and pending documents, but his mind obstinately returned to Christiana, to her sincere smile, the way she looked at him without pretensions or calculations, the warmth of her small apartment, which despite all its limitations was more of a home than the mansion where he lived. At 7 p.m., after changing outfits 3 times, Jose finally settled on something relatively casual: dark pants, a blue shirt without a tie, and a gray blazer. Nothing ostentatious, nothing that screamed millionaire, just a man going to dinner with a woman he was interested in. He drove personally to Christiana's building, something he didn't usually do. Normally he used his driver, but tonight he wanted to feel normal, not like the Jose Marquez who appeared in financial magazines. While waiting in the lobby, nervous like a teenager, he wondered what his partners would think if they saw him now. Jose Marquez, the feared shark of finance, with his heart racing for a date with his domestic employee, the idea almost made him laugh. When Christiana appeared, Jose felt the air leave his lungs. She wasn't wearing anything spectacular, a simple dark blue dress, minimal makeup, and her hair loose framing her face. But there was something in her natural, unadorned beauty that left him speechless. Hello, she greeted with a shyness that contrasted with her usual confidence. You look beautiful, he replied, surprised by his own honesty. A light blush colored Christiana's cheeks. Thank you. You look good too, different from how I see you at the mansion. Jose smiled. That's because I am different. At least I'm trying to be. The drive to Terraza del Cielo passed with light conversation. Jose surprised himself sharing anecdotes from his youth before money and power defined his identity. Christiana listened with genuine interest, as if meeting the man behind the Marquez name for the first time. The restaurant welcomed them with the warmth of a place that doesn't need to pretend exclusivity to be special. From the terrace, Madrid stretched out before them, illuminated by millions of lights competing with the stars. It's beautiful, Christiana commented, contemplating the view with admiration. I thought you'd like it, Jose replied. It's not the most luxurious place in Madrid, but it has something special. I don't need luxury, she said simply. Just authenticity. Those words resonated deeply in Jose. Authenticity. How long had it been since he was authentic? Since the last time he said or did something without calculating its impact or potential benefit. Dinner was wonderful, not so much for the food, which was excellent, but for the company. Jose discovered himself laughing for real, not with the measured laugh he used at social events. Christiana had a sharp sense of humor and a way of seeing the world that he found refreshing. Can I ask you something? She said as they shared a chocolate dessert. Something personal? Go ahead, Jose replied, surprised by his own openness. Are you happy? The question, direct and unadorned, left him momentarily speechless. With your life, I mean with everything you've built. Jose considered the question carefully. It would have been easy to answer automatically with a yes, of course. That's what he always said when some journalist asked similar questions, but something in Christiana's eyes prevented him from lying. I don't know, he replied finally. I've spent so much time chasing success that I never stopped to ask if it made me happy. I suppose I assumed they came together. And did they? Evidently not, he admitted with a sad smile. I have everything society says should make me happy. And yet. He left the phrase unfinished, but Christiana seemed to understand perfectly. Happiness is strange, she reflected. Sometimes it's in the most unexpected places. José looked at her intently, fascinated by this woman who spoke of life with a wisdom that seemed to transcend her youth. Like in a stranger's kitchen on Christmas Eve, he commented with a smile that she immediately returned. Or at dinner with your boss the next day, Christiana replied with a mischievous glint in her eyes. When they left the restaurant, Madrid had transformed. A light snowfall was beginning to cover the streets with a white mantle, giving the city a magical, almost unreal appearance. It looks like a fairy tale, Christiana commented, extending her hand to catch some flakes. I was never very fond of fairy tales, José replied. They always seemed too unrealistic to me. Maybe because you were reading them wrong, she said, turning to look at him. Real fairy tales aren't about rescued princesses or enchanted castles. They're about transformation, about people discovering who they really are. José felt a connection so profound in that moment that it almost took his breath away. Never, not even with the women he'd had long relationships with, had he experienced the sensation of being seen, truly seen by another person. Thank you for dinner, Christiana said when they arrived at her building. It was a wonderful evening. Thanks to you, he replied, for everything. They looked at each other in silence, both aware that something important was happening between them, something that transcended the categories of boss and employee, rich and poor, something simply human. José leaned in slowly, giving Christiana time to pull back if she wished, but she didn't move. Their lips met in an almost shy kiss, contrasting with José's usual confidence in such matters. It wasn't a kiss of unrestrained passion, but one of discovery, of mutual recognition. When they finally parted, José saw in Christiana's eyes a reflection of his own confusion and astonishment. I don't know what we're doing, she confessed in a whisper. Me neither, he admitted, but I'd like to find out. With you. Christiana nodded slowly. Me too, she replied. But I'm scared. Of what? José asked, though he thought he knew the answer. That our worlds are too different, that this can't work in real life. José took her hands in his, surprised by how small and warm they were. Maybe we don't need to be in the same world, he said. Maybe we just need to build a new one together. Christiana's smile lit up the night more than all of Madrid's Christmas lights. I'd like that, she replied simply. As José drove back to his attic, the snow-covered city seemed different, more alive, more real. Or perhaps it was he who had changed, who was starting to see the world not through the distorted lens of money and power, but through something clearer, more human. The lonely millionaire, who had always spent Christmas alone, realized that for the first time in decades, he didn't feel alone at all. The following days passed for José, like a dream he feared waking from. He spent every free moment with Christiana. Walks in the Retiro under the persistent snow, coffees in small cafes he never would have frequented before, endless conversations about everything and nothing. For the first time in decades, he allowed himself simply to be, without the constant weight of his business empire on his shoulders. But reality, as always, lurked in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to remind them that their worlds were still fundamentally different. On the morning of December 30th, José woke to the insistent sound of his phone. Eduardo again. I need you to come to the office. His assistant's voice sounded tense, urgent. There's a problem with the Mediterranean Towers acquisition. José ran a hand over his face, trying to chase away sleep. Mediterranean Towers was a key project, an investment of over $200 million that they'd been negotiating for months. What happened? He asked while mentally canceling his plans to spend the day with Christiana in Toledo. Herrera has made a counteroffer, 15% higher than ours. The shareholders are wavering. José cursed silently. Fernando Herrera, his most direct competitor and probably the person he detested most in the business world. A ruthless shark who would do anything to sink him. I'll be there in an hour, he replied, ending the call. As he showered and dressed in one of his impeccable suits, Jose found himself thinking about how to explain to Christiana that they couldn't see each other today. Would she understand the demands of his world? Or would she see this as the first sign that their lives were incompatible? He sent her a simple message explaining the situation and promising to make it up to her. Her response came almost immediately. I understand. Good luck with your meeting. Brief, understanding, without reproach, Jose felt a wave of affection toward her. Most women he'd dated would have reacted with drama or demands. Christiana simply understood. The meeting at the office stretched longer than expected. A marathon of calls, strategies against financial attacks. The world in which Jose was a master, where every move was calculated, where emotions had no place. By the time they finished, it was past 8 p.m. We've secured an extension, Eduardo announced, visibly exhausted. They have until January 3rd to consider both offers. It's not enough, Jose replied, his mind working at full speed. We need to tip the scales decisively in our favor. What do we know about Herrera? Where did he get the capital for this counteroffer? We're investigating, Eduardo assured. But there's something else. I received this an hour ago. He handed him a manila envelope. Jose opened it, finding several photographs inside. Photographs of him and Christiana at Terrazzo del Cielo, walking in the Retiro, in front of her building. In some, they were clearly kissing. Where did this come from? Jose asked, feeling an icy fury growing inside him. A contact at Confidential alerted me. They're preparing an article about your Christmas romance with the maid. Her words, not mine. Jose clenched his fists, crumpling the photographs. Stop it. It's not that simple, Eduardo warned. They already have the story. And frankly, Jose, in the current context, a distraction like this could affect the confidence of the Mediterranean Tower shareholders. Your public image. My personal life is mine, Jose interrupted coldly. Not when you're Jose Marquez, Eduardo replied with unusual sincerity. Not when millions depend on the solidity of your reputation. Jose approached the window of his office, observing Madrid illuminated under the intermittently falling snow. In the glass reflection, he saw his own image. The immaculate suit, the face hardened by years of ruthless negotiations. Was that really him? Or was it just a mask he'd worn so long he'd forgotten how to remove it? He thought of Christiana, her authenticity, her way of seeing the world without the filters of power and ambition, how in just a few days she had rediscovered parts of himself he believed lost forever. Handle this, Eduardo, he said finally. Do whatever is necessary to delay or soften that article, but let me talk to Christiana. She deserves to know what's coming. He drove to Christiana's apartment with a knot in his stomach that no million-dollar negotiation had ever caused him. She received him with a smile that faded when she saw his expression. What's wrong? She asked, letting him in. Jose showed her the photographs, explaining the situation without embellishments. He saw Christiana's face go from surprise to understanding, and then to something like resignation. I knew this could happen, she said finally, sitting on the small sofa that had witnessed their first night together. You're too well known to go unnoticed. I'm sorry, Jose replied, feeling inexplicably guilty. I should have been more careful. Christiana shook her head. It's not your fault or mine. It's just reality intruding. They sat in silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Jose wondered what was going through Christiana's mind. Was she regretting it, reconsidering everything they'd shared these days? What happens now? She asked finally. The article will probably come out, Jose replied honestly. My team will try to minimize the damage, but the sensationalist press is relentless. They'll call you an opportunist, a gold digger, he interrupted, unable to continue. And does that worry you? What they say about me, or what they say about you for being with someone like me? The question hit Jose like a punch. What really worried him? His public image, the potential damage to his businesses, or the fact that Christiana was being dragged into a world of scrutiny and judgment just for having taken an interest in him. I'm worried about you, he replied finally. I don't want you to go through this. You don't deserve it. Christiana looked at him for a long time, as if evaluating the sincerity of his words. "I've been through worse," she said with a strength that surprised him. "I'm not as fragile as you think, Jose." "I don't think you're fragile," he replied, taking her hands in his. "I think you're the strongest person I've ever known, but this, my world, can be relentless." Christiana smiled slightly. "You know what's ironic?" she said. "When we met, I thought we were completely different. You in your ivory tower, me struggling to make ends meet. But these days have shown me that fundamentally we're very similar. We both understand loneliness. We both value authenticity. We're both willing to take risks for something that seems impossible." Jose felt an overwhelming emotion at her words. He had spent his entire adult life surrounded by people who told him what he wanted to hear, who admired him for his money and power. And now this woman, who had nothing material to offer him, was giving him something infinitely more valuable: genuine understanding. "There's something else you should know," he said, remembering the other crisis he faced. "The Mediterranean Towers acquisition is in danger. If we lose it, Marquez Group shares could drop significantly. I'll have to dedicate the next days, even weeks, to saving it." "I understand," Christiana nodded. "You have responsibilities. I didn't expect you to abandon everything for this." She made a vague gesture between them. "Do you see this?" Jose asked, suddenly anxious to define what was growing between them. "What exactly is this?" Christiana seemed to consider the question carefully. "I'm not sure," she replied honestly. "I know I like being with you. I know that when we're together the world seems brighter, but I also know our lives are complicated, that there are real obstacles, not just in our minds." Jose nodded, understanding perfectly what she meant. On one hand, these days with Christiana had been the most authentic, the most alive he remembered in decades. On the other, the photographs on the table were a brutal reminder of the complications inherent in their disparate worlds. "Do you want us to step back?" he asked, fearing the answer. "Until the storm passes." "Is that what you want?" she replied, returning the question. Jose didn't have to think about it. "No," he said firmly. "I don't want to step back. Not now that I've finally found something real." Christiana's smile was like a ray of sun in the midst of the approaching storm. "Me neither," she replied. "But we have to be realistic. Your work, my work, the press. It won't be easy." "Nothing worth it is," Jose replied, remembering a phrase his grandfather used to repeat. He leaned in to kiss her, a kiss that contained promise and determination. When they parted, Jose noticed something different in Christiana's eyes, a resolution he hadn't seen before. "There's something I have to tell you," she said, her voice suddenly serious. "Something about me that you should know before we decide to move forward." Jose felt a pang of unease. What could it be so important? Did she have a complicated past? A disease? An unspeakable secret? "Whatever it is, you can tell me," he assured, preparing for any revelation. Christiana took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "I'm not who you think I am," she began, and Jose felt the world stop around them. "I'm not who you think I am?" Christiana's words hung in the air, laden with a weight Jose could feel physically. He looked at her intently, his mind racing through 1,000 possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. A false identity, a criminal past, an industrial spy sent by Herrera to sabotage him. "I'm an architect," she continued, her voice barely a whisper. Or, I was until 2 years ago. Of all possible revelations, this was the one he least expected. Jose blinked, confused. "Architect, but you said you never studied because your father got sick," she completed, nodding. "That's true. I never went to university. I learned the trade working with my uncle in Valencia from the age of 16. For 12 years, I designed houses, small buildings, renovations. Nothing grand, but it was my passion." Jose tried to process this information, comparing it to the image he had of Christiana as a domestic employee. "What happened?" he asked finally. Christiana took a deep breath, as if gathering strength to relive a painful memory. 2 years ago, my uncle and I won a contest to design a small cultural center on the outskirts of Valencia. It was our most ambitious project. We invested everything. Time, money, hope. She paused, her eyes lost in the memory. Halfway through construction, the main investor pulled out. He said he had found irregularities. He publicly accused us of incompetence, of cutting costs, compromising safety. Was it true? Jose asked, though he already intuited the answer. Of course not, she replied with a fierceness he hadn't seen in her before. But we had everything against us. The investor was a powerful man with contacts in the city hall. They presented manipulated technical reports. We lost the license, then all our clients. My uncle had a heart attack he's still recovering from. We lost everything. The studio, our reputation, our savings on lawyers who couldn't do anything. Jose felt a pang of indignation. He knew that world too well, where power could crush truth and destroy lives without consequences. Why didn't you tell me before? He asked without reproach in his voice, just genuine curiosity. Christiana gave a sad smile. At first, because it wasn't relevant. I was just your domestic employee. You didn't need to know my story. Then when we started getting to know each other, I was afraid. Afraid you'd think I was approaching you out of interest, seeking an opportunity to get back into architecture using your connections. Jose approached her, taking her hands in his. I'd never think that of you, he said with conviction. If there's anything I've learned these days, it's that you're the most authentic person I've ever known. There's more, she continued, apparently decided to reveal the whole truth. When I saw the ad to work in your mansion, I knew exactly who you were. Valentino Real Estate Group is a giant impossible to ignore in the sector. I felt curious, perhaps even a certain. She stopped as if searching for the right word. Fascination with getting to know someone so powerful in a world that had destroyed me. Jose felt a chill. Had it all been an elaborate strategy? The Christmas Eve invitation, the conversations, the kisses, everything calculated. As if reading his thoughts, Christiana shook her head vehemently. No, it's not what you're thinking. I never planned to get close to you personally. It was just a job, a way to survive while I figured out what to do with my life. But then I saw you that night, so alone amid all your success. Her voice softened. And I saw myself reflected in you. Two lonely people at opposite ends of the same industry. Jose processed these revelations in silence. Part of him wanted to feel betrayed, deceived, but another part, perhaps the most authentic, understood perfectly. Hadn't he also hidden parts of his life, his past? Hadn't he also built a protective facade? Who is it? He asked finally. Who is who? The investor who destroyed your career, Jose clarified, a cold determination forming inside him. Give me his name. Christiana seemed surprised by the question, but replied without hesitation. Fernando Herrera. Herrera Construcciones. The name fell like a bomb between them. Jose felt the air leave his lungs. Of all possible scenarios, this was the most incredibly improbable and, at the same time, the one that somehow made the most sense. Herrera, he repeated almost to himself. The same Herrera who's now trying to snatch Mediterranean towers from me. Christiana looked at him with initial confusion that quickly gave way to understanding. Is he your competitor? She asked, though clearly she already knew the answer. My God, what a coincidence. I don't believe in coincidences of this caliber, Jose interrupted, his mind working at full speed. Herrera has always been ruthless, but this. He stopped, looking again at the photographs on the table. Everything fits too perfectly. He stood up, pacing the small living room as the pieces fell into place. The sudden counteroffer for Mediterranean towers, the photographs leaked to the press, the perfect timing to destabilize him both personally and professionally. I think you were hired specifically to work in my house, he said finally, turning to Christiana. Not by chance, but as part of a plan. Christiana paled. Are you suggesting I'm some kind of spy? Her voice trembled between disbelief and indignation. That all this has been orchestrated by Herrera. No, not as a conscious spy, Jose clarified quickly. I think Herrera investigated your past. He knew you were an architect, that he had destroyed your career. He probably thought you'd harbor resentment toward real estate tycoons like me. He placed you in my house hoping that somehow your presence could destabilize me. But I got the job through an employment agency, Christiana protested. Who recommended that specific agency to you? Jose asked, seeing understanding reflect in her eyes. An old client, she replied slowly. Someone I hadn't seen in years, who conveniently contacted me right after I lost my last job. Jose nodded. The modus operandi fit perfectly with what he knew of Herrera. Manipulator, calculator, willing to use any advantage, however small. What Herrera couldn't foresee, Jose continued, approaching Christiana again, is that we'd actually connect, that we'd find something authentic amid his game of manipulations. Christiana looked at him, a mix of emotions crossing her face, confusion, indignation, but also relief at seeing that Jose didn't blame her. What do we do now? She asked, her voice regaining firmness. Jose smiled for the first time since receiving Eduardo's call that morning. It was a different smile, not that of the calculating businessman, but of a man who had just discovered a renewed purpose. Now, he said, taking his phone, we're going to flip the board. They spent the next hours developing a plan. Jose made dozens of calls, mobilized resources, contacted former colleagues in Valencia. At midnight, when they finally finished, both were exhausted, but with a renewed sense of shared purpose. It doesn't have to work, Jose warned. Herrera is powerful. He has influence. But he doesn't have the truth, Christiana replied with determination. And for the first time, I have someone who can really make the truth heard. They looked at each other, a new dimension added to the connection they already felt. They were no longer just two lonely souls finding mutual comfort, but allies in a common cause, each bringing their unique strengths. The morning of December 31st dawned gray and snowy. Jose woke early after spending the night on Christiana's sofa working late on their plan. He found Christiana in the kitchen preparing coffee. Ready? He asked, accepting the cup she offered. Ready, she confirmed with a nervous but determined smile. Hours later, the boardroom of Valentino Group buzzed with activity. Jose had called an emergency meeting with his executive team, the main shareholders, and, surprisingly to everyone, representatives of the financial press. Are you sure about this? Eduardo asked for the umpteenth time. It's extremely risky. Sometimes the biggest risk is taking none, Jose replied, adjusting his tie. When he entered the room with Christiana at his side, a murmur of surprise swept through. Everyone had seen the photographs. Everyone speculated about the nature of his relationship with who they believed was simply his domestic employee. Ladies and gentlemen, Jose began with the confidence that characterized him in the business world. I've called you here to announce 2 important decisions. He paused, feeling Christiana's hand brush his discreetly, a small gesture of support that meant everything. First, Valentino Group is officially withdrawing from the bid for Mediterranean Towers. The announcement provoked exclamations of astonishment and disbelief. It was the most ambitious project of the year, an acquisition everyone expected to define the company's future. Instead, Jose continued unflappable. I announced the creation of the Valentino Foundation for Ethical Architecture with an initial capital of 50 million euros. Its first mission will be to investigate and expose corrupt practices in the real estate sector, starting with the activities of Herrera Construcciones in Valencia. The murmurs turned into clamor. The journalists typed frantically on their devices. The shareholders exchanged concerned looks. To lead this foundation, I have appointed Christiana Fernandez. Jose turned to her with a smile of genuine pride. An architect with direct experience in how corrupt practices can destroy legitimate careers and projects. And so, before the astonished eyes of Madrid's business elite, Jose proceeded to tell the full story, how Herrera had ruined Christiana's career in Valencia, how he had tried to use her presence in Jose's mansion as part of an elaborate manipulation, and how ironically it had ended up uniting 2 people who never should have met. When he finished his account, a sepulchral silence reigned in the room. It was Christiana who broke it, speaking for the first time with an eloquence and confidence that surprised everyone except Jose. I'm not here seeking revenge, she declared, her voice firm but compassionate. I'm here because I believe the real estate industry can be a force for good when based on ethical principles. My personal story is just one of many. With this foundation, we hope to give voice to all of them. By the time the meeting ended, Valentino Group's shares had fallen 7% on the stock exchange. Several shareholders had expressed concern, and Eduardo's phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from alarmed investors. But as Jose and Cristiana left the building together under the first snowfall of the year's last day, none of that seemed to matter. "Are you sure you won't regret it?" she asked as they walked along the snow-covered sidewalk. "You've sacrificed Mediterranean towers, risked your reputation." Jose stopped, taking her gloved hands in his. "All my life I've built buildings," he replied with a calm smile. "I think it's time to build something more important, a life with meaning. And that, Cristiana, I can't do alone." She looked at him, her eyes bright with contained emotions. "You're not alone," she replied, squeezing his hands. "You never will be again." They kissed under the gently falling snowflakes, oblivious to the glances of passers-by, to the uncertain future awaiting them, to the challenges they would undoubtedly face. In that perfect moment, only they existed. Not the millionaire and the employee, not the real estate tycoon and the disgraced architect, but simply Jose and Cristiana. Two lonely souls who had found in the darkest night of the year the light both had sought all their lives. And as the bells began to ring announcing the arrival of the new year, both knew, without need for words, that the unexpected invitation of that Christmas Eve had been only the beginning of the most important story of their lives. A story they would now write together, day by day, no matter the obstacles, redefining what success, wealth, and above all, happiness meant. The end.